Hello, everybody. Welcome. I appreciate the time you're taking to listen. I hope we will have wonderful success in learning to see in new ways and think and act in new ways together. I like to walk around in dark places, always have. The fewer lights, the better, for the most part. I'm trying tonight to remember something, but it's not the ordinary kind of remembering. In fact, it might be remembering about remembering. About what remembering truly is, rather than our concepts and the way we think about it. But also about remembering beyond ordinary experience. We have all kinds of experiences, and not all of them are conscious. And so there are kinds of remembering that are about non-conscious experience, or at least non-awake conscious experience. We say some things are real, but the real things are extremely explicit. And the irreal things are vastly more numerous and surprising. And the real things seem to be collapsings, derivations of these irreal things that simply aren't concrete. Like this cement, or, all of the relatively stable objects that appear to my waking awareness. These lights, the night sky. Though the lights and the night sky are different orders of the real. And so, if we might try to understand what remembering truly is, we might also want to reflect on what does real actually mean, not in the common human conceptual explanations. What is the nature of realness? If we could lift ourselves above our ordinary confines and see, realness is ... and I won't say what it is. I like to walk in dark places, and as I pass through rooms in the homes that I'm in, I rarely turn on the lights. Once I know them well, I certainly don't need any light at all in my own home. It would be a little more difficult to navigate it entirely blind, but I can be mostly blind and find my way just fine, and I know where objects are by feel. I can find them with my hands. So I must have a memory, you see, of not just the paths between the rooms. No. I want that screw I put in the junk drawer 4 years ago. I can go get that screw. Something in me knows where, not everything, but lots of stuff is. I exaggerated with the screw example. But I could go get a tool, or a fork, or a glass, or some food. Though if I'm going to make food, I turn the lights on. Turning the lights on. So lately, having been here and there, I find myself having to traverse my father's home. It's a big home compared to mine, much more complex. And as I'm there alone, as I walk through the rooms, I have to learn them with my inner senses. Now here's the thing I'd like to suggest, that that's a metaphor for something we're doing while we think we're awake. We are, so to speak, walking through our Father's house, but because all the lights are on, we never become intimate with it, and we have forgotten that we are walking. Again, in a very important and useful manner of speaking, in the house of ... It should not be said or collapsed. So we're always walking in our Father's house, but we can't remember the nature of the house. We just see the strange appearances, the cars and the trees and the cat and the fork and the dollar bill and all the computer screens and such. But we are walking in our Father's house. And if we could see behind the charade for a moment, or from above our position in time, or from above our position in singular local identity. It's almost as if you could flip over the light inside you that generates coherent, conscious experience to shine on itself, then the charade would be up. The jig would be up. So you see, I myself am trying to remember this. I'm trying to remember before, the before of consciousness, the irreal. I'm trying to remember well, for me it's a little bit strange since I've had experience from above my own identity. And I've had experience from outside linear time. Nonetheless, let us consider this matter, because the salmon swims upstream at a certain point in its life. Of course, there are many kinds of salmon, and each individual salmon is a unique salmon. But the salmon, when we speak of them as a group, certain forms of them spawn in the waters they were born in. And so they have to heroically traverse waterfalls and bears and such, and it's a truly heroic, astonishing spectacle of life being unstoppable. If we could swim upstream, in our minds, from the flashlight we shine onto the world, thinking that the world is out there and coming into us through our eyes and senses and thoughts and all these things. And that's a totally ordinary, everyday experience. I'm having it right now. I am walking in an old neighborhood, a suburban neighborhood. There are trees and lights and cars and trucks and cement and asphalt, grasses, shrubs, all these things. Insects on the ground. many beetles, many roach-type beetles, water bugs. It's their mating season, this moon. All these things, the sky, the mind I'm speaking from, all congealing in some kind of a light, yeah? Or at least something that light is a derivation of. Yes, it's like this. Light is a lower order derivation of something. And we could say, oh yes, of course, it's energy. Ah, really, what is that? Well, it's molecular and atomic and quantum excitation, or something like this. Yeah, right? Okay, what is electricity? Well, what is, the quantum foam? Well, we don't know what any of these things are. We have stepladder catchphrases to put a circle around the mostly unknown thing. We don't know, for example, that electricity is one of the forms, this is just a wild guess here, of the nature of whatever it is that is real, ... because we want to know what real means. Doesn't just mean objectively present, right? That's a very conceptual idea. Why is there realness, right? Who or what makes realness? And how could we understand above the derivatives? What is light? What is time? Why are there identities? Do I have access to all minds in all of time, or am I just limited to this body? What are minds? Why are there beings? Death, what is this? Dreaming, ecstasy, adoration. What are these things? The simple explanations do not suffice. They are dismissive. They don't give us what we need to learn to see beyond the relatively crude toys of identity and meaning and so on, tokenization and language that we are given. But this is not my point. I'm still trying to remember. To draw back into my awareness in this moment impossible memories. I'm trying to remember impossible memories. I want to know my memories from before this body. Whatever it is that congealed into me was something before it was this body. In the same way, our models of how solar systems and such are born are congealing based, right? Something became the sun. Time-space itself, but what is that? What is time-space for? Is it a being? Is it a thing? An object? What is it? Normally we treat it as an object. It is not an object, I promise you this. No. Time-space is... I'd have to wax poetic. But again, that's not my point. I'm trying to learn my father's house, and I'm trying to remember the original nursery where my soul arose. Yeah. Here is a cat, and she's taking off, and here are some people walking their dog. Hey, nice to see you. Sort of. So, I'm trying to remember the nature of memory. I'm trying to remember what above my local, momentary, conscious experience knows. but does not speak. I've seen I have seen beauty so beyond my wildest hopes and imaginations. And of course, I see it every day in the sky and the tree and the cat and the people walking their dog, but I've seen beyond the structured. What is it? It's a falseness. The structured falseness that is our common sort of way of being in the world, in our minds and bodies. I've seen impossibles, and known them as good and true and brilliant. Trying to remember. Walking in the dark and learning my Father's house. Because you see, something is going on. Right? And you could say, Darren, stop with the metaphysical parables and such. No, something's going on. It's metaconceptual. And I don't care if it's metaphysical or not. It doesn't even matter. Something's going on and we're made of it. Our core is touching it in every instant of our lives. And we draw our experience of being from this core. And that core, if we should swim back upstream like the salmon, toward the origin of our minds, we will find a garden. It's one thing I can call it. It's not a regular garden with plants and trees, but there's a garden there. And the garden, you know what it means that things are real, and you know the nature of the things that are irreal, how these two play together, and without one there is not the other. It's not just object. You can't go around going like, one-legged cow and going like, oh no, there's just these things I can touch and feel. That's all that there is. No. In fact, the mind with which one forms that particular objection is the toy of intelligences that so far surpass it as to render its babblings ... Trying to remember. And by remember, to see. I don't know how images appear in other people's minds or don't. My own imagination is, this is a kind of one of the mysterious things, right? It goes back to the, I remember on the playground when we actually together came up with the question, because we were at that age of development where the nature of identity was still very open. And so we asked each other, how can we figure out whether the green thing I see looks green to you inside you? How can we tell? How would we know? It was an epistemological question, right? We're like 7-year-old kids having epistemological crises on the playground. How would we figure out if you have the same experience of red on the red car, for example, red flower, the scraped knee, that I have? Are we both having the same experience of that red? I know that you call that red, and I call that red, and we both agree on the pointing part, right? Calling is pointing. We agree on the pointing part. Of course, This is red. We both know it. The colorblind person will have a unique experience. And you'd be better off if you had a person who sees color and 3 differently colorblind people than you would if you just had people who see color. For one thing, the differently colorblind people relate with color in a way that will expose things that the people who see color cannot see. And we have to do the same thing with our minds. It's the same kind of thing, right? There's people who see certain kinds of light, and they have ideas and opinions and so on. You know, I have them too. But what we really need is a group of diverse, different kinds of seeing in order to see. And so, if we cannot have this in our daily lives together with people we know, and by all means let us do so, we have to form, we may form cooperative, cooperative faculties in our own minds that can produce lift, that can lift us above the structured workaday world that is our everyday experience, so that we can begin to see what the nature of the stream we came from is, and why it might be interesting to go back to the origins of that stream. And in that stream, I mean our souls, our consciousness, our minds, our bodies, right? Our families, yeah, all these things. The animals, the insects, the sky, all these things. One body, appearing as you and me, it seems. Or rather, it doesn't seem that way. It's something I remember. Something I remember. I'm trying to remember my Father's house as it actually is, rather than as it appears to my habituated waking world awareness. And I'm walking in the dark. Now, I don't know how things appear in other people's memories, and by things I mean not so much if I ask you to imagine something, although that's a specific memory transformation. In fact, consciousness is transformations of memory, in case this isn't clear. That's what it is. No memory, you're not going to have anything resembling consciousness in terms of like being an identity, and there seeming to be things around you and tasks and goals and things to avoid and such. Those are all transformations of memory. And so too, it would be very difficult to have feelings of any kind at all if we didn't have memory. Think about it. How would you figure something into consciousness without the fundamental substrate that becomes infigured? What is that fundamental substrate? It is memory. Without it, no thought, no dreaming, no words, ideas, math, science, nothing. Nothing. No memory, nothing. No animals, because you have different kinds of memory, right? Though the kind I'm talking about is in the mind. So yeah, we have, the conservation of genomes over the conservation and transformation of genomes over vast epochs of flat time and catastrophic infinities of lived time. What if I could remember what memory is truly for? Not in a utilitarian sense so much. What if I could remember what memory is most truly, or much more truly, doing? What if once I knew? Or what if deep in the core of my essence there are faculties that know? And perhaps it's not inside me. What if deep in the core of our shared humanity there is a pool of transcendental memory? Of course, I think Honestly, the truth is more shocking than all of those things. It's just very dangerous to talk about it openly and bluntly. It seems indelicate. So perhaps I'll resist the urge. Surely you can see that all of the forms and objects and organisms that you encounter while you're awake can be understood meaningfully as modes of memory. The car models, the forks, stones, butterflies and dragonflies, praying mantises, jumping spiders, octopuses, whales, pigs, orchids, poppies, grasses and herbs, and dolphins, and orangutans, bears, badgers, cats and dogs, mice, asphalt, concrete. These are hypostases of time, space, and they obey various orderly principles or transorderly principles that produce unique instances of ordered forms in time-space. All of this is memory, and I'm trying to remember that. I'm trying to recall what once I so clearly and directly experienced. Now, I don't know what happens if people imagine things, but earlier I've had a few experiences this evening, very simple, ordinary experiences where I'm recalling a recent interaction with someone. One was an interaction with a grocery store clerk nearby, and the other was a moment of a conversation with somebody close to me. And although I could still see the room around me, my eyes open, I could also para-see, right? Not quite seeing, but in a second aspect of my mind. And it took a lot of attention. It sort of, it shunts the flow of consciousness in a particular way to do this for me. I could not see, but half dream the memories. This is a very strange thing. This is a very strange thing, even though it's entirely ordinary, and I'm not sure how it might be for you. Take a moment, if you want, and remember an interaction with someone, even while you're still listening to this podcast, if you want. Or, pause it and try it. Try both. And then I took a brief break in making the recording and was in my father's house in at least 2 senses. And I began remembering a song I had written on the guitar. this is a very emotional thing for me, that song. But my sense of hearing was still hearing the sounds where I was. But there is a para-hearing sense in which the notes were being played, and it wasn't as though I could hear them. It wasn't that I could hear them, no. It's something more primordial than hearing. Yeah. It's what hearing is a derivative of. Because hearing is not merely the reception of sound, as we might clinically declare. No. Hearing is not the mere reception of sound. There's an organizing feature, and there's arrays of organizing features that cohere together and synchronize and produce hearing. These are features of awareness. I'm still trying to remember. And I was walking in the darkness in my father's house. Now you know, some houses have angels. And some have shadows and some have both. But often in the house there's an angel there. Might not look like one in ordinary waking consciousness, but if you could step above that for a moment, you'd immediately see, oh my goodness, there's an angel in this house. And I'm not implying Christianity or, Judaism or Islam. Doesn't require these implications. What the hell is an angel? Well, it's not clear that there are or are not such things, but there are, for sure, something that resemble that thing, at least slightly, that we could encounter directly and know, that's what that was all about. And boy, it's about something pretty beyond all hope of framing in words. Yeah, it just rips the skin off your ordinary consciousness and introduces you to its origins, among other things, though different encounters, your mileage may vary. In any case, I'm trying to remember. And time-space can be meaningfully understood as memory. And all the forms and structures you see derive from something we at least usually call transcendental, even though the term is value-laden now. But what I mean by that is, in the same way that I have hearing, and then I have para-hearing, but then I have the aspect of awareness that organizes hearing. It was so weird to have the song in my mind, even though, again, totally normal, except that tonight I'm thinking about memory and its transformations. And the song was playing in the background of my mind very insistently. I wasn't trying to play it, right? It was just playing. There's a kind of magic in that. I'm trying to remember. So, I talk a lot about dreaming, and I've spoken a number of times about the opposite of lucid dreaming, which, is a noble enough pursuit. I think it's a truly astonishing pursuit. And yet, it can swallow the brilliant urge with which we originally pursued it in a way that collapses that urge at a phase of its development that we'd be very excited to exceed. So, there are many layers and depths to lucid dreaming. And there's lots of different forms and modes of the experience that we could usefully distinguish. The blanket term, though, refers to the onset of something resembling conscious awareness in dreaming. And so there's suddenly a doublet where there was previously a singlet, much like our waking experience. Yeah, there's a doublet there. You have the dream manifold, so to speak, and then you have the presence of the dreaming awareness being in there, and then suddenly partial awareness comes from an aspect of waking consciousness and intrudes without collapsing the manifold, so that the dream proceeds rather than just dissolves into waking up, in which case you have a singlet again. That doubling of awareness, right? The one who is dreaming is still dreaming, and the second one comes, we might say, who is not the dreaming mind and participates in the dreaming without being so intrusive that we wake up. And then all kinds of amazing experiences ensue. Some of them very deep. Most could be explained away, which is not my goal at all, because I think it's a very clumsy step to do so. Many of these could be dismissed as awareness playing with its own forward-facing projection, or the flashlight of the mind, so to speak. The sun of the mind is a better metaphor by far. So in lucid dreaming, using the term very generally, it's as if an aspect of our waking consciousness, the part that thinks it's real, by the way, the part that thinks about what's real, the aspect or faculty that does this, begins to interact with its irreal origin in a unique way. And so a variety of astonishing effects ensue. And again, there are many layers of this. In other words, one can keep going deeper to sort of a more primordial situation. But what if, I guess I have at least 2 questions and probably 7, but a couple of them are, we think when we're awake, we're awake. What if we've got that wrong? Or what if we don't have it wrong, but there's a better position. Yeah? A much better position. A position that makes that one seem trivial. And I say there is, and I say our minds are made of it, and I say we can remember it together. Now, the second question is, so we might imagine, okay, the relatively gentle intrusion of certain faculties of waking consciousness into the dreaming context or manifold produces astonishing results. But some of them are very weird, I have to say. There's a vast continua of results that this can produce. And every instance of it is as unique as it is similar to the class of these things. Just like humans, just like moments of consciousness, just like organisms, everything. Life phases, all the stuff we've all forgotten. So, my second question is, if that's what lucid dreaming is, what would lucid waking be? Would it be the gentle intrusion of some of the peculiar faculties involved in dreaming in waking consciousness? And whether or not the answer is yes, it would sometimes be that. And that's an interesting thing to think about, a very interesting thing, a fascinating thing to pursue with some degree of sobriety and caution, discipline. And not merely through the use of intoxicants. So yeah, we might imagine that there's a corollary. The problem is the gentle intrusion of faculties from waking consciousness into the dreaming context is very different from what usually happens. It's not really true. I don't know. I think the dreaming faculties, these are primordial to waking consciousness. They are its origin. And without the dreaming faculties, there would be no consciousness. And these are transformations of memory. I'm trying to remember. I really am. I took a second break, and when I went into the same room in which my memory was making music, the same thing happened. The same song happened again. You see, it just happened to me. I did not even intend it, I have to say. So there must be faculties underneath consciousness, you see. It's a certainty. That have their own, not merely whimsical, but exotic, fascinatingly unusual character. Oh, memory, I sing to thee. To thee I sing in wonder. So, I think the problem is that there's a position that encompasses all of the faculties of dreaming and the relatively impoverished, believe me, toys of waking consciousness, concepts and ideas and beliefs and opinions and things, words, language, usually, not always. What if we could have, and I know we can, and strangely I'm having it to a degree right now because I suspect I've accidentally invoked it. And this is one of the ways. We don't have to think of it in terms of magic. Invocation is a fundamental principle of being human. What if, while awake, we could see through the kind of dreaming that waking consciousness is, and so introduce the lost dimensionality and an entire array of playfully brilliant intelligences within us. This is the opportunity before us in every moment, if we remember. Particularly if we remember together. This is a different thing than just remembering something. So too thinking or feeling or all these things. It's no accident people get together in giant crowds to have extreme emotions. Right? There's not. That's absolutely, they're just building in an emotional amplifier. Right? And it works really well. But even in tiny groups of 2 or 4 or 7, whatever, it's also, we secretly know that we're an amplifier, but none of us are conscious of that. And so we can't play at that level except in the, relatively limited and habitual ways that people naturally do, even when they're inhibited. Yeah. By history and habit and context and the waking world. So the two faculties are certainly better together than they are with one of them dominating. It's basically like asking the question, which hand would you prefer to have or keep or be able to use again or something like this, right? You would never, you might be able to say, well, generally speaking, if I'm right-handed, I'd probably want to keep that one. But there's no need to lose the other hand, right? We, in the evolution of, it's not exactly consciousness, though it's often, that word's often used. In the evolution of human cognition, maybe is more what I mean. There are little apocalypses where one of the hands was simply amputated. And usually when people say the real, they're using the remains of what used to be a vastly more sophisticated awareness of the situation in the mind. And how not to make these cuts and to make these other cuts. And the layered complexities, the topologies of meaning, natural senses, right? Not things we think about, natural senses of this. The origin senses are vastly older, the dreaming senses, than the thinking senses. So one of the things I was concerned about is that whereas the intrusion of the waking mind into the dreaming context, or faculties from it, when it succeeds, it's gentle enough. But if it penetrates fiercely, so to speak, or if it doesn't succeed at being gentle enough, the manifold collapses when we wake up. And then we're, of course, in the singlet of the faculties that were coming to sort of marvel at the dreaming situation. But I'm afraid that in the opposite, lucid waking, the dreaming faculties are inclined to become confusingly distorted by really the vulnerability and simplicity of structure of waking consciousness. It's as if there's two beings in us, and the waking consciousness is very defensive. It knows secretly that it's a tiny part of what's going on, but it wants to tell you what's real and what isn't. And that isn't stuff is to be dismissed. Right? And mostly what's real is its proclamations. Whatever those proclamations are, yeah, that's what's real to that aspect of consciousness when it's very compressed and pointy. Doesn't have to be that way. It can be cajoled into loosening up by its older sister if, the proper circumstances obtain. But lucid waking is my curiosity. And I've had experiences of it, so I remember. Remember, there are such experiences. And it might be part of why they're so rare is that they're much more accessible in a group. Vastly more accessible in a group. There's a contagious enthusiasm and the amplifier problem, right? Both. So I want to ask you some things about the flashlight. I want to ask myself them too. The flashlight never sees itself. And the reason is that the structure of the situation is such that an array of feedback effects are involved, and it's extremely difficult to go back upstream from the flashlight that reveals things to us and the flashlight of our consciousness that interprets them and so forth, right? It's really just one light, but it has features that work differently. And there's all these analogies of the eye doesn't see seeing, very important idea, but kind of cliche. Useful, but a little cliche. The eye can't see seeing. It doesn't see back into its origin. It sees as it does. But consciousness and awareness, they have the capacity to flip over. And this is part of why psychedelic drugs are fascinating and dangerous, both. And a psychedelic experience can be understood as the waking consciousness being suddenly overwhelmed by its features of its own origin. And not just origin in history, though that too. Origin moment to moment, right now, here, while you're listening. There are primordial processes in you, available to your awareness, but unfamiliar to your consciousness. You would remember them if you suddenly experienced them, or moved within the ladder of your mind to a slightly higher rung. It doesn't have to be higher, it could be lower too, or even to the side. That doesn't matter. A different rung that polarizes the relationship between the dreaming mind, memory, and the waking mind differently, right? Like lenses, in a way. And psychedelic drugs essentially, not entirely, but essentially force this experience on us. And of course, the experience interacts with the manifold of waking consciousness in all kinds of astonishing ways, and sometimes brilliant ways. But it's dangerous. And almost everyone notices that it's very difficult, if not a moment. It's very difficult, if not ironic, to try to preserve the content of psychedelic experience or wonderment or realization, seeming realization, in the waking mind thereafter. Doesn't matter if you try to write it down, it won't make any sense. And the reason it, usually, there are exceptions, but part of the reason that's true is that it contains a form of dimensionality that doesn't, we don't play that way here. Complex topic, related though, because what I really want to see here together and remind myself of and remember to bring back into my direct experience, to invoke, is if my waking consciousness is a transform or a derivation of a kind of dreaming, so that this world is less real than a nearby accessible position that is true to my nature and origin and being, then I want that position. And if there's a second one, even better. Really what I'm starving for is that. All of my desires lead in that direction, but of course there's another branch of the situation, which is that I'm trying to remember my Father's house while I'm walking in the darkness of waking consciousness. Not stories. When I'm walking in my actual Father's house, doesn't matter what story I have, it's dark. There are steps and strange configurations of space that are not intimate with these yet. So I have to pay very close attention. I'm remembering my Father's house. Or one might say memorizing. What is that even? Yeah. All these problems. They're beautiful problems, though. And the direction they lead in is trustworthy. Much more trustworthy than the dreaming mind or the waking mind. But I want to remind myself, what the hell is going on when I am dreaming? What the hell is happening there? I am asleep, and I think we don't know really what that means, I have to say. Whatever the hell that sleeping thing is, it's not anything regular and ordinary the way we pretend, because we have this word for it called sleep. Apparently everyone knows what sleep means. Nobody has the slightest idea what sleeping is. Nobody good. Nobody who's really on the question. No. That stuff's fucking... Some of the most ordinary things in our lives are absolutely bizarre, and what I mean by that is filled with accessible... These are frontiers for our lives and minds and hearts. There's a profound ache in us to remember, which means to see. Again, anew. To remember the nature of birth and death and time and light and memory and thought, the seeming absolute realness of myself and all the ways we think about a self. Those are very crude toys compared to what's going on, I promise you. There's a library of degrees of liberty. Not just available to us, we are made of them. They're not things you obtain, right? Again, the problem with the language here. These are what you're using moment to moment. You're employing these things to make a very thin and very crude representation in your thought of what the world and things are and are for and are doing and so on. Yeah? Isness. Your definition of isness is what I'm talking about. And most of us have a really crappy one that has nothing to do with what's going on. It's just very insistent. And it's found a way to match up with the seeming persistence of the physical world. That's its weapon, that one thing. There's a power in that key, I promise. These originary faculties could be understood as memory's children. And what I'm constantly at pains to explain and what I suffer from myself, just like all of us, quote, ordinary people, unquote, do suffer this way. I believe the thin and insistent appearance of physical reality. It's pretty obviously real. I can't pretend the car's not there. I can do all kinds of transforms in thought about why the car is there and so on and so forth. Or that it's just a manifestation in awareness or any kind of crazy thing. That won't help me much. Really what I want to do is climb back up the ladder toward the origin of the discriminating consciousness that is my common experience of waking, though it transforms if I manage to, invoke or stumble into it. The other day I saw a crane fly laying her eggs in a little depression in the earth that she had dug, and she was dancing. In that moment, I lost my regular mind. I wasn't exactly dreaming, but I knew that it called me to a position above my ordinary waking mind. And I was, confused, and this is all post hoc, right after the event. But I was fascinated and wondered watching this amazing spectacle of countless billions of lives in her eggs. My ordinary waking mind wouldn't make much of that. It would do something like, dude, it's just a bug laying eggs, what's your problem? Or at least a critical aspect of consciousness might say something like that. I don't give that much shrift. New forms of dimensionality were suddenly introduced into my experience during that event. Because I was available to them to some small degree, it didn't pass me by. But there's nothing but such events. All events are this kind of event. Yeah? But in this moment, the negotiation between my dreaming mind and my waking mind was disrupted. And so I saw something impossible and irreal, rather than merely the real thing before me, course I saw them both. Didn't lose the real thing. I just acquired a bunch of other dimensions of awareness and seeing and participation and memory and this waking consciousness stuff, where I know, that's a mall, that's a car, that's a tree. I am Darren. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? I'm watching the show, I'm pedaling the bike, I'm writing the words, I'm making the food, washing the dishes, pooping and eating and showering and sleeping and dreaming and all these things. But what if I'm not Darren? What if most of what I am isn't Darren? And the part of me that's Darren is a little tiny bit on the end of a vast universe of beings. What if I've got it backwards? What if I'm a local instance of all the beings and all the dreaming and all the waking consciousness? A unique point of presence in the network. But the entire network is at that point of presence. Always. What is going on when we're dreaming? Look. Those experiences, we can think they are not real, but are we sure that there are only two kinds of experience? The real experience of being awake and the supposedly irreal experience of dreaming? Are there only those two kinds? Do they overlap? Because surely, not in all dreams, but in many, a presentation that appears like the physical world, just not exactly the same always, but similar to it, is in there. Yeah? So you can see cars and houses and shops and fields and forests and animals and all kinds of things, right? But they're all things familiar from your waking experience. But why then are these things, when we are awake, not familiar from our dreaming experience? They must be. We must think they originate in our waking experience. And, it's not unreasonable. But they might not originate at all without our dreaming experience. What if experiencing the car and the street and the insect and so on, what if this is a mode of dreaming that we have never penetrated with our consciousness the way that we do in lucid dreaming? And when I say what if, I really mean it's very unlikely that any other situation obtains here. This is what is going on. Yeah. We're having a different kind of dream that we can never penetrate with the dreaming consciousness safely. And so we take it to be real. It is not real. Certainly the physical things are here and they persist between waking and sleeping. But that's not where they're not real. Where they're not real is they're a mode of dreaming, and their identities are nothing like what we consider when awake. This thing we call waking is a transformation of consciousness and time-space in an aware being who is also all the beings, who is also little subnets of beings. Dead and alive in this toy of it. I'm not saying these things are so, I'm saying these are useful ways to see. So, what is going on when we are dreaming? We have this word, and it's easy to dismiss something very astonishing once we have a word for it. Oh, that's just a dream. There's nothing more astonishing than that. Your body is essentially paralyzed. You're unconscious, and universes emerge in your awareness and are perfectly real to your experience of them. The fact that they are not physical does not mean they are not real. They are perfectly real to your experience of them. And then, perhaps, the waking consciousness intrudes some, and now they are both real and irreal. You see, the doublet. In a lucid dream. I long for lucid awakening. Again, I want to remember it. And by this I mean I want to become it. Myself, I do. There are other wonderful, important urgencies in my soul. But without this, it's as if I'm blind. I'm in my Father's house, and I can't even tell I'm bumping into the walls and knocking over the guitar and stepping on the angel, and can't even tell. Oh, help me see. For if I can see a little bit better, more deeply, in new ways at the same time, then I will begin to remember, as we always do. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to remembering again together sometime very soon.